Well, for example, an island is the worst place that you can be, especially one like Hawaii, which is a tempting target for occupation. I don't think in this nuclear war that China and Russia, for example, are going to occupy the United States because there's too many weapons here. They just want to get it out of the way militarily so they can blackmail the rest of the world into submission. But Hawaii is a very tempting target to be occupied. I think China will, in fact, play the role that Japan did with Hitler during World War II. They'll take the entire Far East, including Hawaii, all of the islands, the Philippines, Japan. There's a grudge match between China and Japan. And I'm predicting that they'll also take Australia and New Zealand, which does not make them good retreat sites. There are other negatives about Australia and New Zealand, but that's the worst, is that Australia is selling its soul to China, letting China buy up all of its natural resources. China wants Australia, especially during a war. You'll see that occupied.
Yeah, I saw reports in the Wall Street Journal that over 90% of Australian mines are now Chinese owned and run, and 98% of rare earth minerals worldwide are being mined by the Chinese. Why did the New World Order Anglo-American globalist allow that to happen? Is that to lure China in?
Yeah, I think we have seen this ever since allowing Mao to take over and undercutting Chiang Kai-shek militarily. The New World Order has always wanted to build these enemies in order to create the kind of war that would force the world into a New World Order, force the world into a global government, and having a powerful China rattling the cages of the world is just what that does. And unfortunately, I think it's going to happen someday. I think Australia is going to lose its freedom. Now, I do think, for example, that my theory indicates that China will make a deal with the West and attack Russia's rear in order to defeat Russia. China and Russia are only temporary allies. They're co-predators, along with the Anglo-American establishment to try to, each of these three predator centers wants to win over the world. And I think China will help the West take Russia down after they start this war. And in doing so, they'll give back eventually Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, but it won't be until after a lot of damage is done during an occupation.
All right, I want to continue going through this, but the book that's available again at Infowars.com, it's essential reading for everybody out there, Strategic Relocation, North America, 3rd edition. But just a brief synopsis, and I know I'm springing this on you, Joel, but I know you can answer it from your perspective. The Anglo-American, global, U.S., England, European elite, their end-game goal, if they had total control, what would they do? Versus the Russians and the Chinese, because I know the Russians are incredibly corrupt, have their own problems. The communist Chinese, very corrupt. But I see the communist Chinese have made deals with the West on eugenics, population. I see the West building them up. So I do see that backdoor deal between the Chi-Coms and the Anglo-Americans. But when I see the Anglo-American group, they want the eugenics. They want the world government. They've got the big plans. And of the three groups, I see them in the final equation as the most wicked. But I see the Russians also kind of following originally the eugenics model. So from my research, people have to understand, why not just surrender to the New World Order, let them have world government so this won't happen. They want the world government to reduce population. They want it to carry out the next phase. So if they ever got it, then we're even in more trouble. I mean, these are just control freaks to the power of infinity. I know that's a long, rambling analysis, but your take on the mindset of these three elites, how they interchange.
Well, ultimately, and I don't talk about this much in my books, but there's only one thing to explain what I call the generational effect in the Anglo-American establishment. If it were like Stalin, if it were like Hitler, who were individual power men, power hungry, it would die out after they die out. But it doesn't in the Anglo-American establishment. It goes from one leader after another, and actually it's an oligarchy of several leaders who keep themselves hidden behind the scenes. But this has a generational effect that has been going on for centuries, and that's not typical of a single leader that keeps moving on. And I have to owe that to what I think is a satanic dark side connection, ultimately, that gives guidance to these conspiracies. But I do think that in order to...
Hold on, let me stop you. That's very powerful. Look at Bohemian Grove. Look at Skull and Bones. All my research, whether it's real or not, whether you're a Christian or not, the elite do believe they're getting that dark guidance. Please continue.
That's right. And I think that China and Russia are tend to have a generational transitional effect as well. It keeps going on beyond one powerful leader after another. I think, frankly, that they all intend to win. They don't ever intend to share power with anyone. If you look at the Chinese mentality is one of disgust for the West. They do not respect the West, except for its temporary power. They've always viewed the West as an inferior society. There is a disregard for humanity that's endemic within Chinese culture. They don't mind killing millions. The Slavs don't mind it either. That's why there's been such a disregard for humanity among Stalin and others. And there is among the elite, the globalist elite, this same almost satanic-based corruption that has a disregard for humanity, even though Western culture does not have it. It respects humanity because of its Anglo and Christian roots. But I think that we're dealing with three predator powers that will never work together except in temporary alliances. I do believe that China will begin this war with Russia. They, in fact, and Russia is only learning about the Anglo-American conspiracy. One of the signs of that is RT, Russia Today, which is a KGB television outfit, is focusing most of its broadcast to American conservatives, trying to help and foment conspiracy, not because, they see it as a way to help take down America. They're not our friend, even though they put out a lot of truth sometimes because they're trying to play our friend.
Exactly. They see the globalist trying to weaken America and Europe so they can take it over, so the globalists can manage us better, and they'll aid that because they understand it weakens the people generally.
That's right. That's right.
And boy, that's why the elite are so arrogant coming out in the open, as you said earlier. Not that I'm on some high horse, but I look at the slovenliness, the slob behavior. I know executives, wealthy people who hold high position, and they could care less about reality. They're decadent slobs. They're not dedicated to anything but hedonism. They're ignorant. And then you look at the general public, they're like that. I mean, there's a large portion that's awake, but it's still a minority. And so you've got either people that are waking up and becoming more decent and hardworking, or you've got an acceleration, a wheat from the chaff. And I think about what will happen with these decadent populations during real crises when our forebears were a lot more moral during the Great Depression. University estimates are 7 million during the 10-year Great Depression died of starvation or complications from malnutrition or other connections to the Depression. 90% rural, most of them self-sufficient versus 89% urban, half of the 11% being self-sufficient that are rural. I mean, that people bomb of just bedlam, it'll make New Orleans look like a cakewalk. It boggles my mind, the type of powder keg we're sitting on.
Indeed, I'm really worried about the population demographics as well. For example, we have a problem with the Black communities with such a high percentage without a father in the home, with a high percentage on welfare. We have a fairly large percentage of the Latino community, which is angry with American society and trying to take it back. We have a large corrupt sector. We have, 40 million people plus on food stamps in America. This is a tremendous benefit corrupt, huge minority that threatens our very well-being someday. And that's why I really concentrate on these population density maps, which I put in strategic relocation. You've got to be very, very careful of where those population densities are going to empty out someday when food supplies get cut off or when there's a major war or even the threat. The biggest thing I worry about terrorism is not real terrorism, because I think most of what we face is provoked terrorism or manufactured terrorism by a government, but it's the government reaction to the very terrorist threats that they create that creates a great deal of consternation, whether it's closing down freeways, shutting down the airlines. It could shut down transportation at will, all in the name of terrorism, and it causes instant panic among people. And that's one of the things that I talk about in strategic relocation, about how to find safe places, is to be very, very careful of analyzing where those exit routes are going to be. A lot of people, when I'm designing homes for people, they ask, well, how many miles should I be away from a road or a freeway? And while I generally give 5 miles and a mile against any major local road, it's much more important to understand how to be out of the way, not to build on a hill, not to be visible from a long distance away, how to be away on turning roads rather than long straight roads where you can see 100 miles. It's important to pick the strategic terrain that people will not be tempted to go to as they're being refugees going down a road.
Let me go back to that for a moment. I mean, you talk about Hawaii, Florida being the worst area because one's a peninsula, huge population, the other's an isolated island that's not self-sufficient. But just looking at Los Angeles, I mean, you're talking about in California, 30-something million people. You're talking about 6, 7, 10 million, that whole metro area. I mean, you talk about bedlam. If there's an earthquake, which they predict is going to hit, that'll make what happened last year in Japan look tame, that is going to be a Mad Max scenario. And if the feds, who are so corrupt now in the States, couldn't deal with Katrina, I mean, for me, anyone living in Southern California is off their rocker nuts.
Well, the problem is that, you have that big basin, and you've driven it, I've driven it. It takes you, to almost 2 hours at freeway speeds to cross that basin. And there are 7 exits out of that basement. 7 exits for over 30 million people. That's just insane, to be there. And I'm very clear about, in my book, that people should not be in those, or if they have to be, and I'm realistic, some people, good Christian conservatives, have to be there. They've got to be close to some of the minor exits so they can be the first ones out of that basin if they have any possibility of retreating.
Exactly. That's the good news, because most people, being zombies, it's sad they're zombies, and they're going to wait until the system tells them what to do. They're going to sit there for 2 or 3, 4 days looking for magic help that's going to come from Big Daddy government. And when they figure out the help isn't coming, that's when the panic begins. And I've made this point, as the depression gets worse and people finally start to prep, that's going to drive up prices in all of this.
It is. You look at San Diego, for example, there's even a worse situation. Not only is it a major nuclear target, but you can't go north without running into the LA basin. There's just no way to get around it. You have to go east to El Centro and start north, and then you've got the Grand Canyon blocking your way. I mean, it's an incredible design feature to try to get a safe route of people out of the San Diego area because of the fact that they're blocked. And once you get off around the Grand Canyon, you've got 2 choices. You go left and you go up towards Las Vegas, and that's a terrible place to try to get through because it's only a freeway. That's the only road going through there, or Highway 95. And then if you go the other way, there's a little narrow 2-lane road, Highway 89, going up the east side of the Grand Canyon. I mean, people trying to get out of Southern California have a real problem.
So in my mind, am I correct saying that's probably one of the worst places in North America itself, in the contiguous area? Or is it D.C.? Is it New York? I mean, New York, we're talking about L.A. being bad. Wow, what's New York being a peninsula?
Yeah, New York is number one. That's the worst area, New York, New Jersey area. And just because, at least in the LA Basin, once you get over the mountains, you've got some clear shots, you've got some desert. You don't have that in the New York, New Jersey area. You've just got subdivisions which get a little bit less dense as you go 50, as you go 100 miles, you've still got millions of people. So it's just going to be one clogged mass of humanity in the New York area. And by the way, you're cut off on the East Coast by the water. So you've only got half of an exit, and it's all the more blocked. Number 2, of course, is the LA, San Diego, Southern California. Number 3 is probably the Seattle area, a tremendous confluence of packed people into a bowl created and surrounded by mountains with, once again, probably 3 or 4 exits out of that Seattle area. And it's a major nuclear target to boot. which makes it even more panic-stricken when war comes.
The problem is it's not just Joel Skousen saying this. It's not just Alex Jones saying this. When you study what governments are saying, and I've seen all these Pentagon reports, British Ministry of Defense reports, they say it is a probability. I just saw a new MIT report out saying within 20 years, they see total civilization collapse. And there's all these real factors that could cause and trigger partial or full collapse. But then you've got the Agenda 21 crowd doing everything they can to sabotage stuff so they can consolidate power. It is pure deviltry. I mean, they think there's a method to their madness, Joel, but there really isn't. It's pure craziness.
Yeah, a lot of people say it won't happen because human beings just won't destroy the infrastructure that they built up. And I said, well, if these were people just doing it for their own self-interest, you'd be right. They wouldn't do it. But remember, these people already have as much power, as much wine, women, song, yachts, cabins in the mountains, anything a human being wants, and they still want more power. What explains that? It can only be satanic inspiration, because they've got already as much. Why would you want any more power? What more power can a human being manipulate or work with unless they're working for a higher power, which wants to destroy God, which wants to destroy what is good in this world? And I think that's the kind of battle. And unfortunately, the more soft this world gets, the less the world believes in systematic evil. They only believe in a few random individuals. They trust Americans. They trust, and they believe in positive thinking. That's deadly in today's world.
You're right. Oh, yeah. People say, be positive, see the bright side. The only positive side is being honest about what we face, as Patrick Henry said, and making preparation for it. I mean, there are so many examples of people thinking you can just be delusional and make it all okay.
Well, returning to the basic concept of safe places, let me just give a general overview of the United States in general and why I rate some areas higher than others.
Let's do that. And let me remind them, the book is available at Infowars.com right now, Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places, 3rd edition, and also gets a free citizen rule book when they order it. Again, folks, I have made preparations myself. This is real. The threats run from bad to worse. You need to get prepared. Ants get prepared for the winter. We've been taught that we shouldn't get prepared. That is anti-common sense, anti our heritage. We all need to get prepared and hope that this isn't coming. But unfortunately, we know it is. Joel, go ahead.
As I said, unlike Jim Rawls, who I really respect, he's got a great blog on Survival Blog, but I just don't believe it's realistic to have all the people try to retreat to 5 states in the United States. I think realistically we have to provide information for people how to retreat in the best situations they can do. So I provide, even in Hawaii, which I give a 0, I provide potential retreat advice. I divide the country into regions according to retreating ability and to try to explain the problems that are endemic to the region. There's the Northeast, and there's the Southeast, there's South Central, there's North Central, there's Southwest and Northwest, and there's the Intermountain West. The Intermountain West has my highest rating overall. That doesn't mean that everybody has to move or has into the Intermountain West, but if you look at being centered around Salt Lake City, now that's not a safe city in and of itself, but it's 1,100 miles to San Francisco. It's 750 miles to Los Angeles. It's 850 miles to Portland and 1,000 miles to Seattle, and it's 500 or 600 miles to Denver. And in between this trackless distance is 600 or 700 miles of wasteland, of desert that simply cannot be crossed by refugees who are fleeing out of the major cities when they fall apart. That's why that area gets the highest rating, just because it has this buffer zone of natural terrain, making it very difficult for people to get there. Now, there are other places that have some of those same similar, though not as good, terrain capabilities. In the Texas region, for example, you've got West Texas out there that has huge trackless areas that cannot be crossed by foot. And you can run out of fuel easily trying to drive across Texas. And so I isolate areas in there that are far enough away from the cities that they won't be able to walk those or get to in a tank of gas. East Texas, for example, has some nice retreat areas, but if you look, there's dozens and dozens of small towns, and it isn't as strategically resistant to refugees flowing from one of those small towns to another. It's very instructive to understand that in World War II, if you look at what happened to the farms after Russia started to invade Germany and everyone in the cities started to take to the streets, take to the roads, they fanned out on either side and probably got as much as 10 to 15 miles either side of the roads and stripped all those farms clean. So you've got to be careful in rural areas if you're close to any of those major refugee retreat routes, that eventually those farms will get taken down. And the ones that will be safe are the ones that are far enough away that you can't walk to from the normal refugee paths. In general, I give the Northeast a fairly poor rating just because, in fact, everything on the East Coast has this high density area east of the Appalachians is approximately 300 to 400 people per square mile averaging, and the major metropolitan areas have 1,000 to 2,000 people per square mile. You empty those people out into the countryside, and you're going to have a tremendous difficulty, even growing crops in rural areas, trying to awake them getting ripe for fear of people standing around your fence just waiting to take them. And it's almost an impossible situation to kind of guard fruit when there's a mass starvation scenario. So
well, I understand that Joel, your general map is a generality when it just gives basic ratings for a state. But as you said, I mean, West Texas is so giant and there's nothing out there. But then there's the issue of the fact that it's arid. I mean, a lot of it is semi-desert. I mean, I live outside town in central Texas. I live, 3-4 miles off a major road. But, still it's not perfect. I can't imagine living in the center of town itself. I want to keep moving around the country, but why is New Mexico such a low rating? Because there's not a lot of people there, but I'm sure you have reasons for that. Why is Louisiana 1 star? Why is Mississippi 1 star? Alabama 2, Tennessee 3.5, Kentucky 3 stars. Give us break it down.
Yeah. One of the reasons New Mexico is so lowly rated is there's a lot of military activity there. There's very few places where you can live in the deserts because of low water supplies. Arizona has a lot of those areas too, but there are aquifers in Arizona that you can find water. Not much in New Mexico, and those places have fairly high population centers. The Southeast, Mississippi, Alabama, have low ratings because, first of all, they're in the path of Floridians, which will empty out. Florida is simply not capable of self-sustaining itself without air conditioning and without government services and supplies. There are just too many people for land that is not suitable for much agriculture.
And you've got the hurricane issue.
And you've got the hurricanes, but a lot of people are going to empty out, and that's what they're going to do is head for all of those states. You have a lot of population in the southern states. A lot of people have moved down there. And when they start to empty out into the countryside, added to that, all the Floridians, you're going to have a real problem with people, with refugees.
I want to show this on the map. Where are the elites moving? I know a lot of them to Idaho, a lot of them to Utah, but they're also at Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. What's the greatest concentration of elites and their bunkers that you've seen?
By far in Colorado. And there's a reason for that, is that Denver is the western center of the dark side of government. They have all of the secret facilities in Denver. Underneath the Denver airport are major underground bunker systems for the elite. And the elite know that, and that's why they're moving in their own personal bunkers to the ski resorts, mostly of Colorado. They have lots of money. They want to live the high life while they're in bunkers, while they have their bunkers, and that's why they're in Colorado. So I would say almost 60% of the elite have reserved places in Colorado, and that's one of the reasons I downgrade Colorado, is because Denver is the hotbed of government control.
Well, they admit that it is the shadow government headquarters with Cheyenne Mountain and all the rest of it. They admit that's the second designated alternate government, shadow government headquarters. That's on record.
That's right, but a lot of people don't understand that they control a lot of the Colorado government, especially the city government in Denver and the surrounding communities, have a lot of, they control insurance companies, they control real estate companies, judges, school districts, when they have control, they really corrupt the entire community. And so it's a real problem.
I agree with your analysis on that because you've focused on this issue more than I have, obviously. But in a way, isn't it good to be right up underneath the enemy? Maybe that's the spot they never look. Maybe they're not going to let stuff get too out of control there.
Well, I just feel uncomfortable myself just because of their ability to come out of their bunkers and start to dictate to local government. And we're depending in this theory of starting a revolution for liberty after a takedown is that we believe, at least I and a lot of other thinkers like Dr. Chuck Baldwin, believe that the Lord will create a remnant and basically inspire a lot of those remnants to seek safe places further out to the west where they can have some freedom and establish some majorities to start to knit together libertarian
No, I agree with
governments.
you. So why build your remnant near the capital of the devil? Because the globalists have said their new capital will be, in many of their writings, will be Denver.
Yeah. And that's why I don't recommend that area at all. I encourage people to move out of that. Western Colorado is fine. The Montrose area is highly recommended. But I still like a lot of the communities, for example, where the Mormons are a majority because they're very conservative, even though they're not politically astute. In many regards, they are preparedness oriented. And best yet, they have an alternative form of government so that if the state government collapses, they look to their bishops and their stake presidents, and immediately they knit the government back together and have order. And they're not exclusive in their ability or willingness to help other people come.
Why are Mormons historically concerned about preparedness?
Well, in the first place, because they came from a persecuted people. It's the federal government that drove them out. State governments drove them out of one state after another. And so they went eastward. They're the only religion in the United States that actually fought a war with the U.S. government and ground them to a standstill by burning their wagon trains and their supply trains across the plains until they had a negotiated peace. So deep in the Mormon heritage is a distrust of the federal government, a dislike of the federal government. And although many of the Mormons are bending over backwards to try to accommodate government because they want them to be accepted, still the basic root philosophy of Mormonism is not one of trust of the world or trust of the government. And that's one of the reasons why they're prepared.
Very interesting, because I know I have a lot of Mormon listeners. I know a lot of people that are prepared are Mormons. I've seen that, but then I see a disconnect between average Mormon people who seem to really know what's going on, and then the leadership like Orrin Hatch, Mitt Romney, and then people are like, well, that's a Mormon attempt to then infiltrate, and try to change the government from within. But I don't think you're going to change this system.
No, I don't either. And I think there's a naive feeling that you can take back government by getting and by compromising with the establishment, making friends with the establishment. I don't agree with that philosophy, and many Mormons don't either.